addressing the National Parents Council, because I haven't got into the reproduction business myself at all yet. But I take some consolation from a scene from one of my favourite movies or films, The Quiet Man. I know it's rather incorrect these days to talk about The Quiet Man, but it was made in the west of Ireland, and I'm from East Galway, and my uncle in fact was working in Ballygluden railway station back in the early 50s when they were making the railway station scene. I think he got a couple of days off work. But there's a particular scene where Will Danaher is about to announce that he's going to be betrothed, or that he's going to get engaged, to the great surprise and shock of the woman to whom he proposes to get engaged. And he has a long preamble to it. He talks about, what's a home without a woman in it, and what's a home without, or what's a man without a wife, and he said, and sure, even Father Lanigan had a mother. And the dumbfounded priest can only reply, what would you expect? So I suppose I had a mother too, and I suppose that gives me, and Father, thank God, and that gives me some qualification to address you. But seriously, it is an honour and a challenge, because I've already had the benefit of hearing several presentations this morning, and I would want to single out actually, well, two of them. Obviously the minister was impressive, but I took a lot away from Francis Shearer's presentation, and I was delighted as well by what John Stevenson had today. Delighted and somewhat scared, because he's dealt with the whole topic of transition and from primary to second level, and more to come. And I had some things to say about that, so I feel like tearing up anything I had to say, because you've actually heard from the expert. But anyway, we'll see if the few words I have to say measure up, and if I'm wrong, I'll take my correction meekly and bravely. There are some practical themes and issues on which I would be glad to comment today, such as the role of parents in secondary education, and indeed onwards to third level education. But I would like the transition, I should say, from primary to secondary and onwards to third level. But I would like, if you don't mind, to offer some thoughts about the meaning and role of education generally, not from an infallible perspective indeed, but from a personal and I hope honest perspective. See, all practical issues have to serve a wider and deeper goal of some kind. And unless we are clear on what our deeper goals are, then any discussion about means and practicalities involved in getting to those goals will be short-sighted. So I think it's always wise to return to the question of what we actually mean by education. The first paragraph of Charles Dickens' Hard Times begins with a particular view of education espoused by the character of Mr. Gradgrind. Now, he says, what I want is facts. Teach these boys and girls nothing but facts. Facts alone are wanted in life. Plant nothing else and root out everything else. Now, I think that we are presently witnessing the gradual triumph of Mr. Gradgrind. At least we may be at risk of that. If facts alone are king, then what the Greek philosophers understood as truth, a much deeper and wider concept than knowledge of mere facts, that notion of truth is gradually eroded from our collective consciousness of what is involved in education. Poetry, art, morality, friendship, hope, promises of love and fidelity, notions of self-sacrifice, these are all expressions of what is truest in us and truest to us. And they all those ideas involve truths that are much more deep than mere statements of fact, which are issues which can be analysable in a laboratory. So a challenge facing education today is that of deciding whether to accept the narrow, reductionist approach of a Mr. Gradgrind, or instead to try to implement a philosophy of education that is centred on the development of the human person in his or her entirety as a member of the wider human community. We need to ask as well whether we view education as a good in itself, in need of no further justification, or whether it is only valuable so far as it's a means to some other end, whether it's political or economic or otherwise. Currently, the indications from the government and other political trendsetters might lead you to think that the latter view, that education is only valuable as a means to an end, that's in the ascendancy. Our education system is so often discussed in terms of its contribution to the recovery of our economy, and I know that's very understandable, and of how it measures up to criteria of efficiency and finance. The debate is almost entirely focused on the need to prepare for an increasingly difficult job market. And at such times, it's almost unavoidable that considerations about the education and development of the whole person can take second place. Now, I'm not for one moment denying that economic recovery and jobs are important, nor am I suggesting that basic literacy and numeracy skills are of disposable value. And I'm certainly not suggesting that this direction in our education system, if you agree that it's there, I'm certainly not suggesting that it's only a recent phenomenon. In fact, let's consider for a moment the effect that an economy-obsessed education has had on education in Ireland. And I would say that second-level education, despite the best efforts of some very fine educators, some of whom I have known, loved and appreciated myself, is geared very often towards two examinations which reward the memorizing of facts as a mean to the end of future employment. Points are king, as we all know, and they're the only measure sometimes of a student worth bothering about, it seems. The challenge to the teacher then, even the idealistic teacher, is to finish the curriculum as soon as possible and to get started on sample exam questions. The task of the student is to soak the facts up and to squeeze them onto an answer sheet, after which the facts are mostly forgotten rather quickly. I wouldn't like to have to sit my Leaving Cert Honours Maths paper anytime soon, certainly not without grind. No wonder then that in this kind of a system the grinds culture flourishes, and no wonder CAO points tables have attained near religious status. And should we be surprised either that such a system might encourage a minimalist approach to teaching? And should we be surprised that such a system sometimes fails to cherish all its students, including and perhaps especially those with disabilities? And yet, how can we but focus on the perilous state of our economy, and how can we ignore parents' rightful and understandable fears for their children's future? My point is that we can't afford to forget that education must be about more than ensuring employment. We need our children to be respected and nurtured in all the different facets of their being while at school. And we want them to be prepared not just to be successful people, but more importantly, to be good people. And this is an important point, because even if what we really want from education is simply economic growth, then a very poor way to go about that is to create or tolerate an education system that's tantamount to being a conveyor belt for calculators. I think that the reason our economy is in the state it has, that it's in, has very little to do with the darts of intelligent economists, accountants, bankers and government ministers, people full of facts and figures operating within the Irish state over the last decade. I think it has much more to do with the absence of enough virtuous, conscientious and critically minded persons in positions of authority. Persons who wouldn't make short-sighted, populist and selfish decisions without concern for their common good or for their own personal integrity. I think much of our current travails are the result of a values vacuum within both public and private life. And that values vacuum is something that a purely technocratic approach to education will only make worse. So I think we need to think about the values. And thankfully, there's a phrase that can cater for all our aspirations. We can use that word growth. And we can talk about education for growth. Economic growth, yes, but also personal growth. And yet let's unite around that vision. And now let's turn to some of the practical matters that might arise. Let me just address, first of all, if I may, the role of parents in education. And what I have to say over the next few minutes will, I hope, combine some suggestions to you of a very practical nature, but not abandoning the idea that we need to have values and a vision of life at the heart of our decisions. I don't believe, and nobody should believe, that education is a matter largely to be regulated by the state, or that the state should have full responsibility for all the ills that are inherent in our education system. Parents, as we all know, have massive responsibility for the education of their children, both within and outside, especially outside of school. And of course, as a matter of constitutional law, parents are the primary and natural educators of their children. This is both a right which you enjoy and a duty upon you. The secret of an effective and progressive school is to have good cooperation between parents, especially but not exclusively by way of an active parents' council, and school authorities. Traditionally, the role of parents has been confined to fundraising very often. But what many may not be aware of is that under the Education Act of 1998 and more recent education-related legislation, parents have extensive consultative rights. such as the right to be consulted on the preparation of the school plan, school policies, the provision of health education, the setting of objectives for the school, the preparation of a statement of strategy, and the preparation of a code of behaviour. Probably the most important of the parental powers comes within the role of the parents' councils in second level education. To be at its most vibrant and effective, a parents' council should meet 6 or 7 times a year, either with the principal or a teacher attending, and the parents' council should be consulted with by both board and school on important matters. Consultation in this sense should certainly not be a token gesture, but should reflect a genuine willingness to engage with and listen to parents' insights and concerns. There are things that the state, that the government can and should be doing to enable parents to fulfil their role in their children's education. And I'm going to suggest 2 simple and realisable aims to the government. The first relates to Section 28 of the Education Act of 1998, which provides for grievance and other procedures. That's of clear benefit to parents as well as to students aged 18, of course, or over. Section 28(1)(a) of the Act provides that the Minister may prescribe procedures in accordance with which the parent of the student, or the student itself if they're over 18, can appeal to the board against a decision of a teacher or other member of staff in the school. Subsection B provides that the Minister may prescribe procedures in accordance with which, quote, grievances of students or their parents relating to the student's schools shall be heard, and subsection C provides that appropriate remedial action shall, where necessary, be taken as a consequence of an appeal or in response to a grievance. Now these are potentially very important powers. They invest in parents' real oversight capacity, and of course they are powers that shouldn't be abused. But more than 10 years after the commencement of the legislation, Section 28 has not been given effect. Certainly there are school-based complaints procedures in place at both primary and post-primary level, but these are agreed between the respective managerial bodies and teacher unions. The Department of Education is not a party to them. So they are not the procedures required under Section 28 of the Education Act, and they do not have the force of procedures based immediately and directly on a specific piece of legislation. Therefore, I would call on the government to give immediate effect to Section 28 of the Education Act of 1998 so that parents' role within second level education will be enhanced to the benefit of both accountability and transparency in school decision making. Now I have a second suggestion, if you can bear with me, relating to Section 42 of the Teaching Council Act of 2001, which provides for the council or a person, who could of course be a parent, to apply to an investigating committee for an inquiry into the fitness to teach of a registered teacher. Section 42, however, has still not been commenced 10 years on. The Department of Education has indicated to me that it intends to commence this section in the near future. This again is a matter of both accountability and transparency. It's simply not good enough that this section hasn't commenced and that the Teaching Council's Code of Conduct, which is issued to teachers, cannot, as things stand, be tested by parents. The promise to effect change in the near future does not include a definite timetable or any concrete schedule, and that is unsatisfactory. Now, though a huge amount of work has been done by the Teaching Council in respect of the registration of teachers and the issue of guidelines for the professional conduct of teachers, and although the Department of Education itself has independently issued procedures to be followed by boards of management and VECs in dealing with allegations of professional incompetence and professional misconduct of teachers or principals, again, none of this is on a statutory footing, and there is therefore a failure to grant full rights to parents in this regard. And let's remember that in other areas, a member of the public can make a complaint to a professional body on foot of a statutory arrangement. You only have to think of fitness to practice and the medical council, for example. The basic issue here, friends, is the need to offer an extra layer of protection to children and to provide extra scrutiny over the quality of education. So I would call on the government to commence and give effect, as I've said, to Part 5 of the Teaching Council Act of 2001. Now, so far I have spoken about the importance of parental involvement. By the way, I wasn't drinking last night. I just, for some reason, have a dry throat this morning. One of those occasions when you're actually telling the truth and then people think you're lying. of mine tells me that he was never wrong except once, and that was when he thought he was wrong, but he was actually right. But anyway, I should have kept my mouth closed on that one. So, I've spoken so far of the importance of parental involvement in education and of the full personal development of each student. And these teams certainly come together around the issue of codes of behaviour. Parents can, and most certainly should, be consulted with on the drafting of school codes of behaviour. By consultation here, I'm thinking of ideas like partnership, collaboration and communication in the drafting process. And schools should play an active role in inviting the parental voice to be heard, making the structural changes to do so if necessary, so that parents feel valued and are enabled to make a greater difference in the life of the school. Parents can and do often feel that the school is the expert, and they, the parents, really have only a marginal role to play in their children's education. But children's formation is such a vital part of parenting that parents cannot leave it to the school alone to be responsible for education, because education, properly understood, is all about human formation. And on that point about parents seeing other people as experts, I really do think, friends, that there is a critical issue here. For consciously offering a world view to their children, and I should say consciously and confidently offering a world view to their children, we know who will. It will be the advertising industry, the music industry, or other vested interests who have an agenda of sexualizing and, may I say more generally, consumerizing your children. And in that regard, I think it really, this is the crucial issue. Do parents, and maybe I'm preaching to the choir here because you are the people who care enough to get involved in Parents Association and the different groups that are present here today. And I doubt if any of you are doing it or are in it for the money. You are the people who care. It's important that more do care, because parents have a decision. Do we see ourselves as passive recipients of whatever the authorities currently in charge have to offer? Or do we see ourselves as, I won't say consumers, but critical beneficiaries, people who work in partnership with the state, with the churches and patrons, and with school boards of management and with school staff? And it's not about being critical in a negative sense. It is about being the discerning person. I like to think of the person in the shop, pinching the tomatoes to see are they the ones to buy. You should be pinching the education and offer to your children to see, is this what will most contribute to my child's happiness and future flourishing in all aspects of their being. And in that regard, I do want to take this opportunity to pay tribute. I was just looking through the materials. One of the advantages of coming early, and I don't normally do that, but one of the advantages is you learn a lot. And I'm just so impressed at the materials that have been collated together, even in this conference brochure, and at the quality of them, and I would compliment you on that. And I also said that I was deeply impressed by moving up to think that a booklet of such high production values is available for €5. It's really a great credit to the people who care enough to get involved in this business of bringing parents forward in their role and helping parents forward in their role as co-partners in the education of their children, as first of all the primary ones, but also partnering them with schools and others. And I think that's a really useful service. But I do think that values are a critical issue as well. And I would say that if I were to be absolutely honest about it, I would take a view of materials that are surprised, and some of them are useful so far as they go, and some of them may need more development. I was hugely impressed by all that was said by the government today in the person of the Minister about the importance of child protection in particular, and that is a very, very important issue. And we've been down a very hard road in this country. And I think what most of us here today would agree on, that if we are to really secure a better future for all our citizens, it is very important for us to move beyond the stage of legitimate anger into appropriate planning, so that things are never got wrong and as badly wrong again. And in many ways I think of it as it's really an issue about authority. Very often in the past, authority was unduly defensive of itself. And people tended to be overcautious in their protection of their own authority. And that would very much be part of the reason why parents, if they were in the past shut out from the management of issues in schools, why that was part of the reason why that happened. Likewise, it would also be part of the reason why the appropriate action to protect children in particular situations was not taken. And part of the problem there, I think, is a misunderstanding of authority. The authority of office is ultimately, and must ultimately, only be at the service of the authority of truth. In other words, if you are in charge of a school and if you make a mistake, there should be a mechanism whereby you can honourably and honestly accept that you made that mistake. And it shouldn't be seen as an undermining of the authority of your office or of your position if you do. In fact, it contributes to your authentic authority when you are able to learn from your own mistakes, and when we are able to learn from our own mistakes. And it shouldn't devalue the perception of our legitimate authority in the eyes of others either. Because true authority is at the service of truth. And I was, heartened to hear what the minister had to say today about all that is going on now, and indeed we heard some of the practical outworking of it in Francis Shearer's excellent presentation. But I would say that it is important to recognise that all sorts of groups have moved on. The minister rightly paid tribute to voluntary organisations and to the GA in particular. And I think she should also pay tribute to the churches, actually. It was very interesting that the Klein report made the point that if they were to be implemented, the church today has better guidelines and more easy to understand and to follow guidelines than the state has. And it's important that we would have that relentless honesty as we move forward into the future. So much is being done on a voluntary basis now by so many different stakeholders in our society, in education, at the level of school patronage, etc. And it's very, very important that all of that progress be acknowledged. But it's also important that we would remember that we must be eternally vigilant in the future so as to make sure that the past mistakes, abuses of authority and failures of oversight would not occur again. And the second issue, I was just saying there that I was looking at and enjoying some of the materials that are supplied by the Crisis Pregnancy Agency, for example, and by the department through the RSE program. And I would say that some of those materials are very good as far as they go. But what you will not find in those materials very often are references to morality or love or concepts like self-sacrifice. And there's a very obvious reason for that, because we are in very politically correct times, and government feels that it shouldn't make judgments that are too informed by one particular philosophical, religious view or another. And that's fine, but government also feels that it is, in other words, to put it bluntly, government will want to tell you that it is better if children don't have sex before the age of 17, but they won't actually necessarily want to link it in with the issue of marriage or with the issue of a lifelong loving relationship. And I'm not saying that to criticise or to damn those materials. I'm really just saying it so as to suggest to you, as the parents, as the ultimate authorities, that these are at best only aids to your work in educating and forming your children in conjunction with your schools, whether they be VEC schools, community schools, or whether they be voluntary schools. Remember that. You are the critical consumer. You are not, or ought not, in my view, to be the passive recipient. You must make critical decisions about whether those materials are of sufficient quality, whether they meet your expectations in relation to your values. And if they don't, you need to see how you then continue the conversation with your loved ones, using, as was so excellently pointed out by John, the correct language and the contemporary language, because you will not get your message through unless you do use correct and contemporary language in dialogue with your beloved children. But it is important that you see yourself as these materials are not handed down from above. No materials should be. They are there to assist you, and you may find that in some respects they're excellent, and you may find that in other respects they are highly deficient, and that is your judgment to make, and it is the judgment of your school according to its ethos, the ethos that you have chosen to make, and it is perhaps the responsibility then of you and your school to come up with the appropriate materials that will fill the gaps if there are any. But I'll return to my specific issue, which is that of codes of behaviour. I think that we should...
Sorry, can I give you 3 minutes?
You can.
Thank you very much.
I could do with another 15, so what I will do... what I'll do is I'll make the script available. How about that? And I won't bore you with the detail then. Okay, a couple of quick closing points. Returning to codes of behaviour, we should view those through the lens of the total development of the student and not simply as a set of rules. So they should be framed as exhortations to behave morally with consideration of others' welfare, not just do's and don'ts. Negative precepts such as do not bully and do not disrupt class are important, but the code of behaviour should clearly indicate the type of character expected in the student. A school which, in conjunction with parents, is explicit and genuinely concerned about what it expects of students is a school that will generally have to rely on disciplinary measures less often. And that's the key point, that secondary school students should be on a journey to becoming the type of persons for whom acting ethically comes naturally. I won't bore you with my ruminations on the transition from primary to post-primary because you've already heard from the expert, and I'm reasonably confident that nothing that I've said in there contradicts anything that John Stevenson said. So I'll move to my conclusion, to your great relief. Taking together the various opportunities and challenges that I've mentioned, I would still want to acknowledge that we have a very good education system. Roughly 90% of children who start primary school finish secondary school. 70% of these go on to third level education. Ireland still attracts multinational investment due in part to the standards of education attained by our workforce. And all of this while the government spends just over 5% of GDP on education, short of the 7% mark advocated by people like Professor Tom Collins. We do genuinely have much to be grateful for when it comes to our education system. But this is no reason to rest on our laurels. I have tried to highlight how an impoverished view of education risks turning our education system into a heartless conveyor belt concerned only with results, points and facts. It goes without saying, of course, that another threat to education exists in the form of the funding crisis. And this ties in with the second theme I sought to explore, that of parental involvement within schools. The simple reality is that a funding crisis which will increasingly necessitate an expansion of both parental and voluntary involvement within second level education. Parents cannot stand on the margins. They must instead be facilitated and encouraged to play a greater role at its heart. The future of Irish education, as well as children, as well as all of our children, it depends on your playing that role. So, in conclusion, I would just like to say, for those of you that are interested in occasional thoughts and suggestions around this issue, it's an area that I take great interest in. I'm happy for anyone that wants to give me your email or whatever to add you to my occasional list. I try not to plague people, but I do send out occasional emails on issues of interest. Some of those relating to education, feel free, I'll be around for a while anyway to explain where I went wrong or point out things that I should have included. But I hope you agree with some of what I've said. It's certainly been a great pleasure and honour for me to address you this morning.